Welcome to our Farm Life podcast. I'm Jenny Wielden, a legal director in the agricultural team at Shakespeare Martineau. I'm joined today by Helen Bounds, who's a partner in our family team. In today's podcast, we'll be talking about pre- and post-nuptial agreements and cohabitation agreements. So firstly, if I could hand over to Helen to give us a brief overview of how the family team has worked with farming families in recent years.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the family team. So we deal with divorce, relationship breakdowns, and matters associated with them. So issues around finances, children. We've got offices, many offices all over the country. We have offices in Birmingham, Solihull, Stratford, Milton Keynes, Leicester, Nottingham. And each office deals with family breakdown. So prenuptial agreements, well, we have advised many farming clients about prenuptial agreements and cohabitation agreements. We've seen prenuptial agreements as a great tool, Jenny, really, in the wealth protection of farming clients. So, for example, if we have a farm owner who wants to transfer shares in the farming business to an adult child, but is concerned that those shares may then be attacked if there was a divorce or a relationship breakdown, then we advise how a prenuptial agreement can protect those shares. We've also used them post-nuptial agreements. So, for example, if the couple are already married, but during that marriage, a decision is made in the farming business that shares should be transferred to an adult child, then we can advise that adult child about obtaining a post-nuptial agreement to protect those assets should there be a divorce.
Okay, and so with these prenuptial and postnuptial agreements, are they set in stone? So sort of, I'm thinking of a scenario where you've got a farming family. Say you've got daughter; she's always been involved in the business. She's met her husband. They've entered into a prenuptial agreement, but he comes up with, or they come up together with, a new venture and diversification. Is it the case that prenuptial agreement would also override and attach to that new venture, or would that be separate?
Yes, so Jenny, it really depends on how the prenuptial agreement has been drafted and what has been included in it. So first of all, let me explain how the courts view prenuptial agreements. So when I started out in the law, 20 odd years ago, we used to say to people who talked about prenuptial agreements, they're not worth the paper they're written on. And that was the case many years ago, but it has changed dramatically. We have seen cases and a case in the Supreme Court where the court have said prenuptial agreements will be upheld unless there is a really good reason why there shouldn't be. So they'll be upheld as long as they are fair. And it really is upon the person who is trying to challenge the prenuptial agreement to prove why it shouldn't be upheld. So the court will say the agreement needs to be fair. Both parties need to have taken legal advice or at least been advised to take legal advice. There needs to be full disclosure and there needs to be no duress. And we don't want any prenuptial agreements signed the night before the wedding because their validity is likely to be challenged. But what the question then that you asked about is it going to be covered? Is new ventures going to be covered? So what we tend to do in a prenuptial agreement is we look at what is there, so what each party brings to the relationship, and we can have clauses that say that those assets which are in one person's sole name will remain, and we can then also look to the future as well for any future assets. So we can say if, for example, one party to the marriage enters a new business venture, then that can be covered by the prenuptial agreement, in that we can say that any new ventures, any gifts, any inheritance that comes to one person in the marriage will stay that person's. We can also, in the prenuptial agreement, look at how joint ventures are dealt with or joint purchases of property. So to answer your question, yes, we look at what's there, but we can also deal with any future assets within the prenuptial agreement.
And what's in the prenuptial agreement? Is there anything else that You've said not on the wedding night, so there's going to be conversations taking place before these agreements are entered into, and perhaps potentially before our clients come and speak to us. So is there anything else that that often comes up as something that should be included within a pre-nuptial agreement?
I think there's lots of things really to consider. And it's really sort of trying to, as far as you're able to, sort of future-proof the agreement. So one of the things that we discuss and would be good for you, Jenny, to discuss with clients if they speak to you about prenuptial agreements is, what if there are children? Factor into your prenuptial agreement provision for children, or have review clauses. What we tend to do is have review clauses, for example, every 10 years. So you can just revisit that agreement and think, has anything changed? Is there anything that we want to change now in the prenuptial agreement? And as long as both parties agree to that change, then that prenuptial agreement can change according to the situation. So, we've had odd things in prenuptial agreements that clients have wanted us to put in, for example, about pets, who keeps the dog, who keeps the cat, that sort of thing. We need to be careful that we don't put things in that are against public policy. So make sure that it's all very reasonable, but it's really listening to clients and understanding what it is that they are concerned about. Now, some people have real concerns about, for example, some content, some items that have been handed down, and they just want to make sure that on divorce that they will keep those. So that can be in the prenuptial agreement. It may be that there's something about pensions that people want to put into the prenuptial agreement. So it's really exploring with the client what assets they've got, how they imagine things would be if, the awful thing happened and there was a divorce.
You touched there on children and making sure that these agreements are future-proofed for the couple having children. What sort of clauses, provisions do you put within the prenuptial agreements or are asked about to include?
So you could make sure that if there are children, then a home will be provided for those children with the parent that cares for them. I think the prenuptial agreement between two people without children, you could say, right, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, and off we go. But once you add children into the mix, then there is that complication, if you like. So what we would do there is, as I say, we'd look at whether a home is going to be provided for the children. We'd look at whether there needs to be spousal support. So if one person isn't able to work or chooses as a joint decision not to work because they're looking after the children, then we'd look at whether there needed to be any spousal support. And then things like school fees, that can be included as well in the prenuptial agreement.
And have you, in terms of current climate, with obviously COVID, it's delayed weddings and giving people a lot more time to talk about the futures, possibly not. But has there been a change in attitude or a change in questions that you've had come to you as a result of the current climate? I think, Jenny, actually, it's probably not just the current climate. I think I have seen over the last few years a real change in attitudes towards prenuptial agreements. So I think younger people perhaps are more accepting of prenuptial agreements. People are thinking, well, we have a will, we know what will happen on death, and then we need to think about what will happen if we were to divorce. I think another thing is people are getting married older than, at an older age than they were before. So they have accumulated wealth that they want to protect. So we're seeing changes like that. And also we're seeing second marriages. So with people who have been married previously and may have adult children and they want to keep their assets. So I think there has been a real attitude change towards prenuptial agreements. I wouldn't necessarily link it to the pandemic, but I think it's linked to a change in attitude. Okay, actually, it's interesting you talk about that change in attitude, because I think that it sort of links in, dovetails nicely with the other part of what we're talking about here, which is cohabitation agreements, because we obviously see a lot more now about people choosing to live together instead of getting married, or actually people going in to buy a house together as friends because the property market is so tough. They're getting on the ladder with someone else, and what those agreements include. So I'm just conscious of time, so I'm sort of skipping on a bit to cohabitation agreements, but I think it fits quite neatly with what we've just discussed there. Helen, so do you want to tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, what you're seeing with cohabitation agreements?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's absolutely right, Jenny. More people are living together and more people are speaking to me about cohabitation agreements. The law relating to people who live together is very, very different to the law relating to married couples. So if a relationship breaks down and people aren't married, then what happens is the court really just look at property law. So they look at legally who owns the property, has another person got a beneficial interest in it. The litigation around it can be extremely expensive and can be long. So what people tend to do is they think, right, okay, so if we buy this property together, what do we do if the relationship breaks down? How are we going to resolve that? And we then have a cohabitation agreement. And that can include such things as not just property, although the property is the main asset that we would deal with, but it can be how the relationship is dealt with. So who pays for what? It can deal with, the contents on a relationship breakdown, what would happen there. So yeah, we're definitely getting more and more requests for cohabitation agreements.
And with the cohabitation agreement, are you seeing those being introduced where you've got, say, one person owns property and someone else moves in as well? So they've got that sort of shared initial cost together, but some sort of arrangement around shared living costs going forward.
Yeah, definitely. We are seeing so much more of that. And we still get people coming to us and saying, I'm a common law spouse of so-and-so, and what are my rights? And actually common law spouse just doesn't exist. I think it was abolished with Henry VIII. So I don't know why the myth still continues.
From memory.
So yes, we're constantly telling people about, you need to be very careful if you move to somebody into your property, or if somebody is moving into a property and thinks that, by living there for so long and by contributing towards the household bills, electricity, gas, etc., that they will have a right to that property. They won't. And so we're advising them about that and looking at cohabitation agreements.
Because from my perspective, I'll be honest, I don't see a lot of cohabitation agreements. It's not something that I'm asked about an awful lot. And I can't say why that is. It's possibly actually just lack of understanding that those agreements are out there. And like you say, this sort of assumption that there's going to be some sort of common law position that will rule it. But what I do see is, and what might be a more familiar term to some of the farming clients listening, is declarations of trust. Mm-hmm. And that's often where a family member is helping to invest in a property, or you've got two individuals investing together in a property. And those declarations of trust can come from something as simple as, when we sell, we're each owed 50-50. And that's it. Or you can see them go into much more detail about expectations as to keeping proper insurance in place, expectations as to repair of the property throughout the period that someone's living in it, what will happen if that the one party is living in the property, the other's invested, what will happen if that person that's living in the property wants to bring a partner or another friend to live in the house with them. And in some situations, it is a straightforward monetary exchange, we're going to rent a room out. In others, it is like exactly as you've described, the girlfriend or boyfriend is going to move in, and then there can be concerns, in the family as to what will happen, and will that family investment still be protected. So that's really interesting, actually, that there's an extra layer of paperwork that can be introduced should that be needed.
Yeah, that's right. I think cohabitation agreements and declarations of trust can sit side by side.
And in terms of bringing this up with not necessarily with the clients themselves, but how the clients bring it up with their family members, because obviously we've got that position that as you're going into marriage, the invitation to enter into a prenuptial agreement, it doesn't necessarily sound very romantic. Is there anything that you can sort of suggest that might help pave the way for those conversations?
Yeah, of course, Jenny, and that's understandable. When people are focusing on flowers and cakes and you suddenly say, and what about your prenuptial agreement? It does sound very unromantic. The way I speak about prenuptial agreements is that they are like insurance policies. We all take out insurance policies for when we get into our cars, when we buy a house, and we hope that we never have to use those policies, but they are there in case the worst happens. And a prenuptial agreement is like that. What we hope is that, time and care will be put into the drafting of this agreement, and then it will be put into a drawer and not used. The couple will stay married, forever and a day. But what it does, like an insurance policy, it gives that couple certainty. So this is the way we speak to clients about it. Litigation is expensive. It's emotionally exhausting. And when you are dealing with a relationship breakdown, if you have that certainty of how your finances are going to be dealt with, it really does help the couple. So that's how we tend to raise it. But I think that as solicitors, we've got to be aware of the fact that actually this couple are going to be spending, we hope, the rest of their lives together. And we don't want to deal with it in an aggressive manner. If you don't take out clause 4, then the wedding's off. That would be ridiculous. And the way I like to deal with prenuptial agreements, if we can, is by having a round table. So we get together, the potential husband and wife and solicitors, and we talk about it. And we say, clause 4, or for example, is important because of this. So we really hear what each other is saying and come to an agreement that way. Because the last thing a couple need when they're about to get married is sort of aggressive solicitor correspondence about drafting of a prenuptial agreement.
And presumably, from what you said, the exact same will apply to cohabitation agreement.
Exactly the same, yeah.
Because you've still got those excitements of first living together.
That's right.
The other person having their key, but it's just knowing where everyone stands going forward, what's important to one person, so that there's no fallings out further down the line. And in terms of the audience for these agreements, we talked initially about it being where there's one partner coming with a lot of wealth, or where it's second marriages and things. Is it always a precursor to a prenuptial agreement that it's for the wealthy, or would you say it's for anyone?
I think it's for anyone, really, especially if they know that, in the near future, circumstances might change. For example, they may be gifted money by family members, etc. So really, it isn't for the rich and famous, and that's what we used to think about prenuptial agreements. It is really for the average person as well. There are so many cases, Jenny, when I see a client and I think, if only you'd have had a prenuptial agreement, it would have changed this. It could have been resolved at the beginning without all of this sort of heartache and cost. So, yeah, I think they are for everybody. And we do, a straightforward prenuptial agreement to incredibly complicated prenuptial agreements where we've got a lot of assets. So, don't feel, if you're speaking to a client, don't feel, oh gosh, perhaps they're not in the bracket of a prenuptial agreement, because they will be.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, having spoken to farming families, I can see their benefit in two ways. Firstly, where you've got the sort of those conversations about bringing in the next generation into the farming business. If they are unmarried or in the early stages of marriage or a relationship, there's always that sort of concern that, yes, we want to go into partnership with our son or our daughter, but we're not sure about going into business with their partner. I don't know them as well, and what will happen. So for me, that's sort of, they're having the business conversation, and the prenuptial agreement is a natural follow-on to fit with that.
That's right.
Conversation. And the other one I've had, which actually I hope our viewers will find interesting, is that we had a client. I had a client that had raised the prenuptial agreement because they had got a lot of assets of farming business with shop and cafe and diversification, and their daughter was very much involved in the business, and her partner had proposed, and it was all very exciting, but they were sort of tentatively discussing prenuptial agreements. And interestingly, her partner turned around and she said, well, I would like a prenuptial agreement because my earning capacity has got the ability to go quite high because I'm in a good career and I'm forging a path for myself, and I'd like to protect my assets. So I think it was interesting because that obviously was a situation where that conversation actually went really well because both parties were able to cover themselves with what was important to them.
Yeah, and I think it's about that openness, isn't it? So, they both could have been sort of sitting there thinking, well, I want a prenuptial agreement, I want one, but I daren't say anything. And it's how we get our clients to open up and talk about these things. I think this goes back to what I said at the beginning, that attitudes towards prenuptial agreements are changing so much that people are saying, well, hold on a minute, I want a prenuptial agreement because in that case, the earning potential needs to be protected. They're not as sort of negative, the negative connotations to them and not how they used to be. People see it as just a sort of wealth protection, as I say, similar to an insurance policy.
And just sort of to round up really, is these agreements, you talked about 10-year review clause, is that the sort of usual time scale that we would be looking at to renew them, or is there?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends really. So if you've got a young couple who are just getting married and they think that they might have children in the next few years, they might want to review it earlier than 10 years. It really depends on the individuals. And the review can just be getting it out the drawer and saying, I don't want to change anything. Do you? No, I don't. Thank you. Let's put it back in the drawer. That's can be the review.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's interesting. So it doesn't need to be a big, costly review.
No, not at all.
It's just a checking in and seeing life sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, then it helps, if the worst happens and the couple divorce and one party tries to say, well, I don't want to stand by the prenuptial agreement, it's not fair, then if I act for the other party, I can say, well, we had a review a couple of years ago and you didn't want to change anything then, so you didn't think it was unfair then, it wasn't challenged in any way, and it just helps that process really of making sure that the prenuptial agreement is upheld.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Helen. Well, I thank. Welcome to our Farm Life podcast. I'm Jenny Wielden, a legal director in the agricultural team at Shakespeare Martineau. I'm joined today by Helen Bounds, who's a partner in our family team. In today's podcast, we'll be talking about pre- and post-nuptial agreements and cohabitation agreements. So firstly, if I could hand over to Helen to give us a brief overview of how the family team has worked with farming families in recent years.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the family team. So we deal with divorce, relationship breakdowns and matters associated with them. So issues around finances, children. We've got offices, many offices all over the country. We have offices in Birmingham, Solihull, Stratford, Milton Keynes, Leicester, Nottingham. And each office deals with family breakdown.